So should you or should you not purchase bullion, hold bullion, diversify in bullion if you're a prepper, survivalist, bushcrafter, someone of a prepared mindset? So you have on one side the camp of people who say that the bullion is not a good way to go because you should have all your preps first, and even if you do have all of the preps that you need, if you have extra money, it's still better to even buy more preps because you can never really have enough food and water, medical gear, ammunition, and so forth. Now, on the other side of the camp, you got the people who say, well, you need to diversify your wealth and to protect against hyperinflation and so forth. And so I think you need to have precious metals, maybe gems and diamonds and so forth. The other camp, says, okay, well, what about the middle ground? And this is kind of where I'm at. Now, once you get to your goal, for example, maybe it's a 6 month or a year or whatever that goal is of preps, and you're very much fulfilling those preps. You're not just saying that, you actually do have it. Maybe taking some of your extra money for, and maybe in a small manner to get some precious metals. But I would have to say, honestly, over 90% of the people I know personally and on YouTube are not even there yet. Shouldn't even be considering getting precious metals because you don't have your basic needs met, or those basic preps to meet those needs. So this is a conversation that we probably shouldn't even be having for most people, but for those who are at that level of preparation, let's just look at the obvious question of what should you get and how should you go about it. So in terms of precious metals, you really have the three main metals that at least I would do, just because they're the most recognized, and in a grid down situation, if they ever get to that point that they are doing barter and trade with a new currency such as a precious metal outside of maybe a standardized government currency, you would probably be sticking with either silver, gold, or platinum. Rhodium may be there, but let's just stick with the main three. So silver is traditionally viewed upon as like your backup or emergency checking account. People in general, and this is not a bad philosophy, it should be maybe up to about 20% of your holdings in precious metals. Now, in terms of your gold and platinum, they typically say that's like your emergency backup secondary savings account, and that should be made up of about 70 to 80% of your diversified metals. And in terms of gems, you would only want to get into something like that, and also rare diamonds, maybe like colored diamonds, if you know what you're doing. Don't buy anything if you don't know what you're buying. And so that would probably be maybe less than 1% of the population would want to buy something like rare types of gems, because most people don't know what the heck they're even looking at. And for the most part, I would still, even if you know what you're looking at and you know what is a good value, long term though, other people won't, because they don't really identify and know what the value is of gems. They may be a lot more reluctant to actually accept that in a trade because they don't know how to verify if it's real or not. So in those kind of situations, I would probably stay away from gems, and especially stay away from just the average diamonds. Diamonds are not as rare as you would think they are. They're really not rare. And even though there are some colors of diamonds that are more rare than others, I would I'd never go into diamonds. That's just me. So going back to the reason you would have any kind of diversification like this outside of a government-sponsored or a government-backed currency, and that's because of hyperinflation. Now, the camp that said, that it doesn't really support buying metals, they would say things like, well, just because your investment goes up doesn't mean that all the price of the goods go up, because they are inflated. And so it's still cheaper to go and buy the things now, because relatively speaking, they may be very similar to if you had precious metals. And that's if precious metals go up. And so there is some wisdom in that, that it's better to have things now than to have to kind of scour and search for these scarce and rare commodities such as food and water and medical supplies when things get really hairy over a long-term event. So I guess that's the conclusion that we come to here, is that it's better and easier and even can be cheaper now to get what you need than to have it do it in the future. For example, you may get to the point that you may have to trade a weapon for a bag of rice. or a bag of beans. And that weapon could be maybe, let's just say, for example, a Glock handgun. And it could be a $500 to $600 weapon. And you're trading that for a bag of beans or rice. That's going to be one of the more expensive bags of beans and rice you ever traded for. But not just that, though. It's a silly component. So if you have no money, but you have extra weapons, especially if you have more than probably what you would need, like you have like maybe 6, 7, even 10 backup weapons, but you don't have any food supply, no water filter, no first aid kit, I'd be selling the majority of those backup weapons, cash them out at the best price you can get, and then put that money into preps, the essential preps, not more guns, not more ammo, but the preps. This is like we talked about many times, that there's too much emphasis on weaponry within prepping. You definitely need to have options to protect yourself and your family, but you don't want to need to go overboard. Just like blades or flashlights or any other kind of like so-called tactical gear, you can get overboard real quick. And so, just for a real quick demonstration, I've been carrying this a lot more now ever since I've been doing my reviews. This is the Kershaw Shuffle 2. I have several reviews now coming out and already out. I just really like this knife. Now, this is equivalent to almost, this is just a few dollars less at the time of this video, of an ounce of silver. So would you rather have this with the capabilities to some of the tools and the blade? Would you have this, or would you rather have an ounce of silver? During peace times like right now, I would rather have this in my pocket because it's usable. I can do all kind of things with it. During an SHTF situation, would you rather have this or a piece of silver? I'd probably still have this. Now, that doesn't discount the fact that you might have some kind of purpose for silver, especially when these civilization starts to get back on its feet. And if there is no government and the monetary system is completely been reset, there's definitely a room for an argument of, okay, having a diversified types of wealth and rare commodities could be something that could come in handy. But for the most part, I would have to say useful tools like blades or water filters, food, and all the other gear and essential types of just basically prepping categories that we talk about all the time. Those items within those categories are going to be worth much more and much more useful, especially in the short to medium term. And that's kind of the more important time period, because you got to get through those short to medium time periods to get into the long time, or to be a long-term survivalist, if you will. So I would say, just as a rule of thumb, this is just me, after all your preps are made and put in, an active status, and that you're ready to go and everything is all good, at least, for what you would consider a good time frame, 6 months to a year or whatever, I would honestly say that I wouldn't go much more from there on out in terms of spending money-wise. Probably no more than maybe like 10% of your assets from there on out into precious metals. The rest I would still put into and create more redundancies in your gear or food and water. And so that's just my thoughts on it. There's a lot of different theories on this. But I think that you can get a little bit heavy, a little crazy with the metals, especially people who get into gems and diamonds too, or buying other kind of fiat currencies. I will say, though, that you should definitely still have in your emergency fund, though, a little bit of the cash or the actual the printed government money that is in your country in a safe location on your property, or diversified among other different locations for short-term emergencies, while that particular monetary denomination is accepted, or that type of currency is accepted. But you may even go one step further, and the nearest country to you, you may want to buy up maybe a few $100 to maybe $1,000 if you just had that much money laying around. People like myself and other people don't have money like that laying around. But if you ever wanted to go really far with the diversification, you could get into maybe one or two other currencies of paper money in case you ever really had to egress to another country, God forbid, or just had to do trade in it with another country and they don't accept your currency. Like, for example, if you're in America, you may want to have some of the Canadian money, and that might be an option, or maybe some of the Mexican money or whatever. Those are the pesos and all this. But it's something that you have to consider. Just another option. That's pretty far though to consider maybe buying another currency outside your own. But it isn't that crazy, especially when it was right before the euro dollar came into effect, before the euro, the European Union came about. The countries are so small in Europe, as we know, that when people traveled about, people had a lot of different currencies because they would do business in a lot of different countries because they were all kind of real close by. And now the euro dollar, which is still in effect, of course, but it kind of helps solidify some of that. Of course, there's a lot of problem with the European Union, and it took a lot of the sovereignty of the people, and there's a lot of bad things about the European Union. But in general, though, what you have is, for many, many decades, and even hundreds of years, every one of those countries in Europe had their own currency. And so it wasn't that unusual to have different currencies because you would travel about. And so that's just a lesson to be learned there. I'm going to go ahead and cut this video off here, and we'll talk about something else in the near future. But just remember, though, it can be a tool to have precious metals, but just make sure you have all your other assets put away, things that probably be worth a little bit more, in my opinion, in the short to medium term, and maybe even in the long term, such as food and water. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you real soon.